Hello and welcome at the Po. My name is Jona Moro and we are very happy to have you all here today, especially of course our panel today. And thank you already for organizing Lilli Lička. It's already like we've done a few events together already, and yeah, thank you for doing that with us and for trusting in us. And a special thank you and welcome, of course, to you, Anna, today for being here and talking about your book, which is also, I think, back there to be purchased, but I think you will talk about that anyway later. Just a few words from me about the live stream. Welcome in the live stream. By the way, if you don't want to be heard in the live stream, please just don't take the microphone I'm going to offer you. And you will be heard in the room, but not in the live stream on YouTube. That's it from me. I will hand over to Eva now. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, good evening also from my side. I'm really pleased to welcome you here and to the book presentation of Garden and Metaphor, Essays on the Essence of the Garden. Yeah, my name is Eva Schmollmüller. I'll moderate today. My professional background is not from landscape architecture, therefore I'm even more interested in what we are talking about today, and I'm curious about the present thoughts and reflections on this topic. Yeah, also thank you from my side for the organizing team, especially for Lilli and Anna, and also for the Institute of Landscape Architecture at the BOKU Vienna, and in cooperation with the Slovenian Cultural and Information Center in Austria. Good. We will now dive into the topic of the book. The book Garden and Metaphor was edited by Anna Kučan and Mateja Kurir. The English edition was published in late 2023, and the Slovenian edition a bit before in 2021. So Anna will present the book today. I'm really happy to have you here, and you will give us an overview about the topics, and yeah, I'm curious. So now I'll give a short overview how the evening is structured. First, Anna will give her presentation. Afterwards, Lilli will join us for a conversation about the pressing questions which are focused in the book. And we will try to answer some of those questions. For sure, we won't manage to answer all of them. Yeah, what is the garden? I'm curious. Therefore, we have our two experts, and I'm really curious about the role of the garden as a private and a public issue. After our talk, there will be the possibility to ask questions for the audience, so we will have time for this. After approximately 1.5 hours, we will switch to a more informal section where we can have some chats and talks afterwards. Okay, let's dive into the topic of the books, I'll say. What I'm curious about is about the description of this event, and also in the introduction of the book, you are writing about demands that garden has to fulfill right now, and that these demands are even more than ever before. The essays collected in the book deal with the garden as an art, garden as the place of enchantment, garden as action, and garden as resistance. I may now introduce Anna, editor and co-editor of the Garden and Metaphor. Anna Kučan is a landscape architect and full professor at landscape design and theory at the biotechnical faculty of the University of Ljubljana. Individually and with her team of AKKA, she has won competitions for urban and landscape architecture, as well as several national and international awards. She writes for various publications and has somehow 30 years of experience, I've learned, in landscape architecture and urban design. I may now ask you to give us the presentation on your book. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Hello to everybody. It's really nice to see you in such a number. So the book, as we heard, was first published in Slovenian as Vrt in Prispodoba by the Biotechnical Faculty of the University of Ljubljana and the Museum of Architecture and Design. So here I have first to thank the Birkhäuser publishers to accept the text and to make the book happen. For this I express my special gratitude to Ria Stein for her encouragement and help in the finalization of this project, which came out in the form of a rearranged and richly illustrated English edition, accompanied by photographic essays of Anne Schwalbe. But we can start at the beginning. First, there was the garden. The book reopens questions about what the garden actually is and what it represents. The question is whether the garden today, in a time when we are no longer capable of thinking in terms of metaphors, can even be a metaphor. Does it need to be? And if so, a metaphor of what? Or are our circumstances such that the garden has become solely the terrain of our direct engagement? So the question is, why write about the garden in times when we're facing greater environmental problems? Is the garden really so irrelevant? Humanity now faces challenges that demand reflections on points of departures, goals and values, as well as the conceptualization of a new imaginary that will suit our emerging reality. A glance around the world quickly reveals that human beings have arranged and adapted their living environment and thus built their own worlds. They have conjured amazing creations that exhibited a high level of mastery of natural processes and, especially, the ability to coexist with them in a fragile balance. Today, this balance has been all but destroyed, and thus it has become necessary to re-examine the origins and foundations of our relationship to nature and to our fellow human being. At the very center of this relationship stands the garden as its metaphor and embodiment. With many varied perspectives, the book Garden and Metaphor unveils the multi-layered contextual essence of the garden, reaching beyond its self-evident presence and opening up questions of the essence of the garden and what it represents. In this sense, the book is an interdisciplinary exploration of what might be placed at the core of landscape architecture and explores more recent contemporary concepts of redesigning nature. Renowned experts from landscape architecture, art history, philosophy, and sociology, as well as artists and authors, situate the garden in the context of contemporary life and attendant pressing social issues. Thus, the book constitutes a unique collection of essays reflecting on the metaphoric potentiality of the garden by critically exploring contemporary concepts of reshaping of nature. The English edition of Garden and Metaphor is divided into 6 chapters that frame ideas about the meaning of the garden. The contributions in the Garden as Essence section, made by Catherine Ward-Thompson, the director of Open Space Institute from Edinburgh, Janez Marušić, Pavel Gantar, Kinga Szilágyi, João Gomes da Silva, present views on the existential role of the garden, its inherent contradictions and potential. The part Garden as Future, in which Saskia de Wit, Karl Steinitz, Udo Weilacher, Martin Prominski, Andrew Benjamin, and Gerard Reinmuth open up possible future scenarios, while Garden as Community, with Lisa Didrich, Urška Jurman, Dževad Karahasan, and Lilli Lička, presents the complexities of current practice, emphasizing the multiple potential of the garden as a metaphor of coexistence. The chapter Garden as Enchantment, in which Mark Tribe, Davorin Gazvoda, Martin Rein-Kano, Aleš Vodopivec, and Jure Mikuš dig into the sensual and spiritual aspects, as well as into the joy gardens offer us in both the public and private realm. Garden as Art, with Jože Barši, Miklaus Komel, Erika Bordon, Nadia Zgonik, Leo Kreft, and Olaf Nikolai, exposes the somewhat unfathomable dimension of human involvement with nature. And Garden as Reflection, with philosophers Mladen Dolar, Dejan Komel, Sven-Olof Wallenstein, and Mateja Kurir, offers some philosophical insights in the past and present aspects of this relationship. All contributions range from presentations of in-depth studies about the meaning and role of the garden, accompanied by lucid insights born of keen observations, to poetic and artistic contributions that combine views on both the function and the infinite allure of the world of designed nature. In some sense, the division is artificial. The garden is characterized precisely by its capacity to belong to many worlds simultaneously. Here lies the reason for such a varied collection of authors in the book, which would not have happened without my co-editor Mateja Kurir, a philosopher interested in gardens enough to embark on this venture with me, and to whom I am especially grateful. The reason for the book was also the death of Professor Dušan Ogrin, an internationally renowned landscape architect, professor and founder of the landscape architecture studies at the University of Ljubljana, to whom it is dedicated. Of course, the question arises as to why we choose to honor Dušan Ogrin with the collection of reflections that do not directly address either him or his work. The book deviated from the more predictable Festschriften format for two reasons. The first is rooted in Ogrin's personally. He was a man of duty, and he responded to whatever spatial problems were posed to him by the society. However, at the center of his interest was always the garden. As he understood it, the garden was both the essence and the beginning of man's ordering of the world, and represented his most intimate preoccupation. Ogrin spent an extensive part of his long years of research on the garden and the World Heritage of Garden Architecture. In 1993, drawing on those years, he wrote The World Heritage of Gardens, which was published by Thames and Hudson in English and was simultaneously released in Slovenian, which was very important for our profession. This book not only established a suitable vocabulary in my language, but also attempted to understand the garden in all of its functional aspects and subtleties of meaning. For millennia, the creation of gardens has taught us to merge nature and culture. What's more, it has taught us to skillfully navigate the current of dynamics between development and conservation. It is for this reason that the collection of reflections about the garden seemed the most appropriate way to pay tribute to the memory of Ogrin and his work. And the second reason for the book is very general and emerges from the desire to explore possible methods of solving today's environmental and social problems, which will, as said before, require a reassessment of our values as well as appropriate ways to design our physical space. However diversified, the essays have a common ground, at least how I understand it. Obviously, we need to transcend the dualistic conception of nature and culture as separate entities and begin to create a non-dualistic, unified philosophy of nature that will fundamentally change our behavior. Again, precisely the garden, which has long functioned as a unifying force, is the space and place in which the world of man and the world of nature, the world of mind and the world of instincts, regardless of what form they take, are the most intertwined. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. There were already many topics combined. For our conversation now, I may introduce Lilli Lička. She will join us for the talk. Lilli Lička is a landscape architect and full professor, as well as head of the Institute of Landscape Architecture at the BOKU, University of Natural Resources and Applied Life Sciences. She was head of the office Lička until 2016 and founded LL Landscape Architecture the year after. Also, she co-founded and cooperated with several practices in Vienna, especially known right now for the Westbahn Park Jetzt, for BLA, Office of Rural Concerns, and several institutions about the Archive of Austrian and International European Landscape Architecture. Thanks, Lilli, for joining.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you, Lilli, for doing this with me.
So we talked and wrote about some aspects I'd also be really interested in. And one of those topics would be the relation of the garden or the park and nature with us as humans. You just addressed it in the end. So there is the relation is visible between humans and the nature via the garden, and I'd be interested what makes the wilderness so attractive right now, because you said it changed over time, and right now the wilderness seems to be attractive more than before. Do you have any opinions on that?
Perhaps I can start. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming, also from my side, and also thank you, Anna, for making the whole book, and even also inviting me to contribute. I'm very happy to be part of that. About the wilderness, I mean, it has always been an expression of the relation between human and nature in the design of the landscape and the garden. So whatever you see is designed. That's the first thing. Even though people would perhaps claim that the wilderness is not designed, but if you have seen the introductory slide, you see that also these situations which might seem to be, left by themselves, are in fact very cleverly and thoroughly orchestrated nature. In fact, they could also be. It could also be a design decision to leave it to leave it by itself, to leave it for succession. But the wilderness, I think, at the moment is very attractive because it seemingly closes the gap between nature and humans. And we talk about post-human at the moment, so we are part of the whole thing, which we have always been, of course. And I think that's something which makes it attractive, because it seems to be a perfect world. It seems to be a sound world, which we are all longing for in times of extreme challenges. What do you think?
Yes, no, I agree with you actually, and because in your text you actually said that Gardens today, contemporary gardens, should appear raw as wilderness, and it should appear as very different than should be wilderness. So they should appear. We're still exactly, we have an idea, and we are like making the world comply with this idea. And why is wilderness so attractive today? I also think it gives us the aura of freedom. It has the aura of freedom. It gives us the illusion that there's this untamable, unpredictable world which we can invite into our living environment. Of course, there is always some kind of this unpredictability that we will never master, and we will never be able to control it. But it is entering also the domain of a fashion, maybe even. In a way, you know, the wilderness, it becomes the new aesthetic code in which we have to comply when we design.
I think that's a very good point, because the wilderness or the wild aesthetics act as if they were not, but they were something which goes far beyond fashion. I mean, because it's nature. Of course, in the nature which we observe, or perhaps also co-create, there is always a decision behind it. And then the decision could also be to leave it to a certain process of development. But I think that is something which in gardens as such, perhaps more than in public parks or public green spaces, occurs over the whole lifetime of every open space. But in the awareness of the public, now nature sort of takes over, rather than we design something which allows for nature to develop in a different way, and that's because there's no because the fashion or styles are perhaps not as present in the public awareness when it comes to gardens or parks.
So does that mean that there is a difference in designing private gardens or the public space? Is the wilderness the same in both of them, or do you see any differences?
I'd say there are differences, of course, although these categories have started to merge. You know, if from the beginning the garden was, I mean, it started with the garden, that's for sure, because it was taken out of wilderness. That was the human gesture, that was the act of denaturalization of nature at the time. And it happened simultaneously with the beginning of agriculture, when you also would burn the forest or the savanna, and you would level it down to grow crops. So it has this common root, and this is exactly denaturalization of the environment, taking it out. So, but now the categories started to merge, and we have long used park and garden as a synonym, and even the landscape we use this as a synonym many times. Although the landscape has been invented in the 13th, 14th century, it was invented first as a concept, and then it was translated into a spatial design. And when we today, these categories have they don't no longer stand alone. But talking about private gardens and the whole machinery, also the nursery machinery that feeds them, I think it's quite different than designing public landscapes of whichever form they take. You know.
to some extent, I think there's also the question of scale. Because, of course, a public landscape, as you call it, could be a large area which could contain natural places and subdivisions, perhaps, which is much more difficult in a small area where you also want to use the space as well. And when you say taking out, I think one issue is really important. That's also the border around it, which is the origin of the garden. Of course, we know that the word is deriving from all kinds of different places, different terms for border or fence or whatever, and that makes it also different, because if it's a contained garden, then of course it is different from, or it has a border towards perhaps nature or also other spaces which can be urban or anything else. And the order inside can be independent from the order outside.
Right, and maybe if I just add something to it, but in both, in all the scales, more or less. I mean, it depends on the scale, but in all the scales, you would still have, let's say, the curatorial practice. There would be a selection of species. In a small garden, there's even more, probably, the selection of species. You know, the hierarchy on evaluation of species. We talk a lot about the invasive foreign species, we talk about the native species, and dealing with an urban environment, it's very difficult to talk about native species because urban structures are by default human-made. So I think these concepts that are easily applied and easily used in either in professional practice and in professional language, and or when they exit the professional language and practice in a wider society, they can be very dangerous actually. If you're not aware what you're doing, weeding is a cultural, weeds are the cultural concept, and it's still applied. Even in larger areas, sometimes you can, if you leave nature in just like this, leave areas completely to natural succession, then the first plants that will come will be invasive plants, foreign mostly. So we just need to be aware of this, the complexity of the processes we're working with and we're part of.
So the role or the attractive part of the wilderness you see, as long as as you can handle it, as long as you somehow can moderate or as long as there are no invasive species or.
No, I think it goes beyond that. I mean, it is something which we call wilderness, but which isn't. So I think it's cheating, really, in a way, and that's also why it's important to distinguish between the aesthetic impression and the ecological, things which happen, everything which is depending on each other. So I think in the areas where we are living and where we also work and where our recreational spaces are, and that goes far beyond the urban and also the fringes or the suburbia, their wilderness is hardly ever to be spoken of.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say this also. I think it's, but I also would not know the answer right now. There are probably two ways to go with these ideas. One was presented a few years ago in a festival in Ljubljana by Liam Young. I think it's called it's a digital film called The Planetary City, like the 10 billion city. So we could all combine in one, to me, completely dystopical city, you know, like it's one tall building on the planet, to free all other parts of the planet for a wilderness to go. So that would be, the planet will be taken by natural succession, and then we will live one, like in Hong Kong, you know, one over another. Or we live together, and the other way I'm inclined to, I don't know the answers, is maybe the garden, because it's the combination, it's the symbiosis in a way, which is it's been agreed upon between humans and other species. That's one way to go, I think.
May I do some question? How do you define wilderness?
Just a moment. Do you want a microphone, or do you?
But I will repeat. Yeah, I can repeat.
Yeah, please.
Question. Yeah, how do we define wilderness? I don't know. It's difficult to define. I think that the categories has become more difficult. I don't know if you would ask a biologist, or if you ask a landscape architect, or if you ask a sociologist, you will get different answers. I don't know. Can you answer this?
No.
I mean, you know, what is actually wild in terms of, let's say, environmental scientists would say that there is basically no place on the planet that has not been influenced by human beings, one way or another. And that's why we call it this era an Anthropocene era. But there is still a lot of wild things going on, even in our urban environment. There's a lot of nature growing, and it's even invisible to us humans, and we do not interfere because we don't even see it. So is it wild? I don't know.
I think it's a very good question.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I think it's a really good question, and I think also that's what we were talking about, that you don't really have a definition of wilderness, but you have an aesthetic impression of wilderness, and that's what is now created in gardens or public spaces. That's what we were addressing, in fact.
Casual style.
Pardon?
Casual style.
Well, it's more irregular. It contains perhaps also some areas which are not controlled or less controlled, and it's less formal, and we deal with plants which perhaps have not been used 20 years ago. So if you look at the catalogue of plants, that this is changing all the time. It has always changed, and it is now changing, and it will be different in the future. Because the wilderness concept now is also something which is somehow heading towards a final answer, because that's how it works. And that's not true. Because it's always changing.
Yeah, it's changing. As it was, like, for example, the 18th century has abandoned the perpendicularity of Baroque with disgust. Yeah, so that's how we are now introducing other species into our designs. This less from casualness, but the casualness is arranged, is designed casualness. That was also a very good. That was a very good remark, and a lot of it is defined by legislation. You just have to use this kind of technical measure or this kind of technical plants. I mean, not technical plants, this kind of species in the gardens you're obliged to. For example, in Slovenia, you have to use 25% of pollinating plants.
Yeah, just a moment. I think this topic is really activating. So we already have another question in the back. I think also to the same topic, right? Okay, yeah, maybe we can just stick to the wilderness. And afterwards we can continue with some other aspects. But yeah, so please.
Yeah, I just would like to enlarge the view on wilderness and offer you to look at it not as a term of nature, but as a cultural concept. Wilderness is a cultural concept, and when you're looking in the history of the gardens in the medieval age, in the Quattrocento, you can read poems, Tristan and Isolde, Francesco Colonna, and you see wilderness as it's absence of human traces. It's dark trees and it's danger and animals, and you have the meadow with light, and this kind of cultural concept is represented in the history of gardens in terms of a mountain in the garden, in terms of a grove, in terms of dark trees, and so on. And there are movements and periods. It becomes very dominant, thinking on mannerism, Sacro Bosco, or thinking on a romantic area. No? In the classical landscape garden, it's out of wilderness. Everything is lovely, and suddenly wilderness. Everything is wilderness, but it's a concept of the mind. It's not nature, and you know.
Yes,
That's
great. Yes, it's right. Yes, it's this bestiality of, let's say, the primordial wilderness that has been neatly put into a grotto in the Renaissance times. Good remark.
Okay, thank you. There was another question. Yeah.
Do you think we could speak probably of several definitions of wilderness at the same time? We spoke maybe of nostalgic wilderness. We could speak about kind of unplanned wilderness. And a couple of years ago, I was introduced by a research group, which was done here in Mindling, a group of students at the AA Nanotourism summer school. They were tracing unregistered trees and plants in the district of Mindling, and they called it the crack system or something, but this was a true wilderness that actually arose by itself. So basically they kind of creative narratives and stories of all the plants that actually seeded themselves, and they were not registered, because obviously in Vienna there is a very profound registry of all the trees, no? And then they tried to see that as a network, as a wilderness that occurred by itself, as a network that also contributes to something that it's planned. And since you are usually planning, and this is the unplanned wilderness, in extreme urban conditions, so in the crack of the concrete, but it's not alone, it's not one species. It became like the number of it was more like a new forest of Mindling. So how do you see this possible wilderness?
Well, we were discussing before that one thing, and one perhaps also danger about that concept is that it detaches the world in which we live, in which we try to influence to the best, from anything else, and that's not true, because also there is something behind the fact that something can grow somewhere, you know, and as soon as you have a building site, that will go. So I think to sort of define the unplanned plants or also animals, to define them as something as opposed to any societal or cultural decision is very tricky. So I would really say that this is something which allows then to withdraw from decisions which have to be taken about those other wilderness or whatever plants or whatever it is, and I mean, even mapping it is something which puts them to some extent out of the wilderness, because it's on the it's on the catalogue.
Yes, because it's, even if we call it a spontaneous vegetation, which is the fact that it found the area to grow, it's a consequence of our actions, our former actions. And this kind of ideas have been very much alive in the 70s already, mostly in German cities, with this landscape architect Leroy. I think he was Dutch actually, but working in Germany. He was promoting, let's say, not preaching, but promoting the idea of that urban areas that we do not need to design urban landscape, because urban landscape will happen. If I simplify his ideas, yes. Of course it will happen, but by only happening, if you don't do nothing, you cannot fulfill the very manifold needs. I mean, how do we live in a city? Probably we cannot only live with this spontaneous vegetation, or maybe we will have to. I don't know, in future.
I think it more shows, it shows us, as how I read it, or the students, the potentials, or that actually they go against the system. There is a very clear system of the fire protection where you can plant a tree how many meters from the building, no, and this is increased, like it's getting bigger and bigger, so the way the landscape design is done in Paris, it's now forbidden in Europe because the trees are too close to the buildings. So, and now of course only the wild seeds that find the crack in the concrete or asphalt, they can come as close to the building that we are not allowed to plant. And I think we can, I'm not saying that we should just go with that, that would be super naive, but I think on the opposite, we could learn from those tactics, and we know about all these bombs and all these kind of 40 years of how to navigate the urban landscape, but maybe we should re-question the standards that we have complied that are not allowing planting the trees in the places that obviously we could plant them. At least for me, they show us the potential that we claim as professionals that the tree could not grow, but actually does. So can we learn from that?
I think we can, but it grows, but somebody will cut it down when it's big enough, if it's too close to the building. But I think you're right. I think we should, not only we could, but we really should reassess and reevaluate also the rules that we now have to work within. Of course, we always have to kind of, how do you say this in English? You always have to not trust your own rules. I mean, you have to be distrustful to your own rules and have this doubt into what you're working. So yeah, definitely we can learn with this persistence of nature that can grow anywhere. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, interesting. Yeah, one aspect we should remember. Okay. Maybe we can stop for now with the wilderness topic, because I would be interested in something you mentioned before, a few minutes before, like how the functions of the gardens merge, and how also in the urban context, I think the borders of private and public shift a bit. So we talked about the collective gardening and the community gardening in this sense, and I wondered if this could be a rather new form of like individuals and public space, like private and public, and in this kind of gardening a lot of aspects come together in my thoughts. So what's your point of view on urban gardening and collective gardening?
Please.
Well, that's another topic which is really, really big, because the urge to be able to occupy perhaps terrain in order to do some gardening, that also has many roots. And that's something which is important to consider, I think. One route is that perhaps you need something to sort of identify as helping to also heal the world again, something which you would like to know that that you can influence. If you give water to the plants, they can grow. So you have a contribution to all these huge questions, perhaps of climate change and other things. But a large root of urban gardening really derives from the necessity to have some collective social activities. And that could have been something else than gardening. So the way of gardening and doing the work together is that was the starting point really for the whole movement. It was the movement that intercultural gardening would sort of bring people together of different backgrounds, and after that it would be a social organization which would bring people together which have to work together in one way or another. And of course producing vegetables or fruit or also flowers can be really rewarding because you have an immediate effect. But I think it's very important to distinguish between those roles which urban gardening has, and concerning the question of public and private, that is really, really tricky, I think, because urban gardening areas are not restricted to private spaces. They also happen in public spaces, and the question there is really important, whether it's a privatization of public spaces as well. So I think just to say that it's, private activities go into public spaces, that's too easy for me.
Yeah, it's definitely a new, well, maybe not that new, but it's a form of appropriation of space. And in some aspects, it's a good one, because it goes into abandoned spaces, but then it interferes with the spontaneous nature. And sometimes it also has, I think it also has its drawbacks in a special way. I think it is a form of a kind of a social fight, actually, but and definitely a metaphor of the need for making ties, making social ties, which actually practices, even if it is private, because it tends to be private, because if you grow crops, even if you grow vegetables, you invest a lot of effort into it, and you don't want to be taken. In Ljubljana, we had a very wonderful example of this called Beyond the Building Site, Onkraj gradbišča, which Urška Jurman explains, is how they were, through this practice, learning about making social ties, also learning about how they have to negotiate things among themselves and also with this nature, because they needed to weed and this kind of thing. But the selection of plants cannot be excluded, and sometimes it also leads to the selection of, visitors. So it's tricky. I agree with you very much. But we also talked about the gardening practice as a metaphor of something much more horrible. Before, do you want to book? Not yet. No, I mean, the film you watched.
Oh,
that would be,
yeah. But that was the question of a metaphor.
Yes.
Also, I mean, the gardening practice allows you to be distracted from other troubles, which
it's
of
like
course,
a refugee. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not restricted to urban gardening, where it's a collective effort, but it's also, of course, in your own practice. And it's also for, I mean, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing in general, but I think you have to be aware of where it happens, where it's allowed, and where you can organize it in a way that it doesn't exclude others from using the space or taking part in it. Yeah. I think the other thing I will talk about later.
Okay.
But I like very much Urška's contribution in the book, because I think it shows very well how difficult it is also to organize it, because they had contracts with the city, and then they had to be prolonged, and then you have all those different levels of organization and decision making, where you can see that it's really about appropriation of space in general. It's the same question with other uses which you could have. I mean, like playing, play fields, or anything else.
Yeah, that would have been my question in general about urban green. If you like engage for it for your individual improvement, or for the improvement of the whole neighborhood, or like just for an improvement of collective urban space. So even we don't have to stick to the urban gardening, but like urban green space in general. How do you see your profession in this case?
Well, I think that landscape architecture is part of the whole planning decisions which are taken, where you decide what to do with which space in the city. I mean, this is something which is starting very early not like before even the land use would be defined, but then of course it goes down to how it is really executed into something which can be also inviting, or can be excluding, and all those kinds of cultural definitions. I think this is something which you can't also again detach from other decisions which are being made in the development of a city.
And therefore it's rather political.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, this Steinitz, Karl Steinitz, who the majority of you may know, I mean, he said to me, "Forget the garden, design the policies." And in this, he's right. Actually, the main decisions of the future of our planet are made in law and economy and politics, not by the way we design, but still, I think that what we know, or at least we're learning how to do, is to manage natural processes for a certain cause. And the definition of this cause, I think it's very important. It's not only about the greening and biodiversity and cooling down the planet. It's also, it definitely is a cultural practice, and it gives us something more. It's embedded in our aspirations, in our fears, in our expectations. It has this deep cultural roots, and that's why it's so important to be aware of this. That the form actually is can be also meaningful, not only functional, and that's where I see the role of our profession in designing our environment. I mean, the physical space, because whatever you do, if you materialize the idea, it finally comes out in some formal layout, and that's it's not just a technical measure.
Maybe is it if I understood it right, is this also the discussion about if you design some gardens or parks versus the right now rather often heard blue and green infrastructure? So there are like different meanings and different wordings, and also new wordings coming up as we all notice that the climate crisis gets worse. So maybe there is more focus on these technical aspects than on the design or on the metaphors of the garden.
It definitely is. I mean, the new wording, the new terminology is emerging, and to me, it's I see it's effective because it works with the politicians and probably also with the money givers, But basically what it does, it flattens the richness of, the garden, if the garden stands for all the designed landscapes, to a technical measure, to a scientific system.
And you can also put into numbers. Take these areas or also tasks out from the cultural and political system. That's very radical in a way, because if you look in garden and art history, it has always been a problem, or not a problem, but we have always, and our ancestors have also dealt with technical questions which have to be solved. If you look at Versailles, it's all about technical questions, more or less. And in every period, you could define that differently, along with the measures which, the possibilities which we have in technical terms. But what this book does, and why I like it a lot, is that it brings in all these other values, I would perhaps even call them, although that's a difficult term as well, but which are aggregated into the space of a garden or a public, also public park, which has a cultural value. It's about people who use it. It's about people who decide about who is perhaps part of the game and who isn't. It's, as we already said, it's a completely political decision, but it is also a very, very strong question of a philosophical concept. And that's what, if you read the texts by Benjamin, for instance, I think this is a really very good insight into how we interpret this space, but also why we have this urge for a garden at all. I mean, why do we need a garden, we know that we are depending on ecological soundness and things like that, but a garden is much more than that. A designed space, and design doesn't mean that it's very irregular and formal and formalistic and so on, but it means that considering how we provide a space which is apt for different uses and different groups and at different stages, and how it can develop, that's much more than a technical measure, like an infrastructure would suggest. And that's why I think it is important to also stick to the terms which allow for that wide interpretation of the task. It's not about garden art only.
And it flattens its, the depth of testimonial, mythological, cultural integrity that it can bear, or used to have through the history of humankind.
So, just some really important aspects get lost if I focus on just these terms.
Yeah, it's like ticking off, we solved the square meters, we solved the number of species, we solved, I don't know what else you can solve. I do, but that's too long. And so I think, and then it's good, but that's not enough, because you need people who respond to that, people who appropriate it, people who interpret it, people who live with it. And that's a strongly societal definition, and it always has been. It's if you look into the past, it has always been somehow an expression of how, not only how we deal with nature or how nature deals with us, or whatever part we play in it, but it has always been an expression of how we define who is able to do what and how we want our planet to develop. And I think that's an important thing.
And I also think it's an important thing, not just in landscape architecture, but as well as in architecture or urban planning. We should see what the problem is and how we can find appropriate solutions. So I think it's the same thing for all of these planning
Well,
professions.
the best way would be if we do it together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a collective endeavor.
Yeah.
It's a collective mission.
That would be
definitely.
also a question I'd be interested which collaborations you see as really important, which professions or should work even more together than we now do. It's like a really concrete questions, I know.
I think there's a large number of professions which would be really helpful to have a better collaboration with. Of course, I mean, architecture and landscape architecture, that's an obvious thing because climate and meteorology and things like that. But I think also we could have a very, very big impact from humanities.
Mhm.
And that's very often neglected. And because all these other more or less practical colleagues, they are, and that's very good. I mean, I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, not at all. But what I miss somehow is, again, not only finding solutions, but creating new spaces. That's not the same thing.
Yeah, and also to help us understand what we're really doing. I mean, from this perspective, you know, I think that's really important. And I think that in curricula, and the wild curricula of landscape architecture around the world, maybe there's not enough of teaching of philosophy, sociology, urban sociology at its most, but it's not only. There's also need to be probably a rural sociology and things like this to enable our students and ourselves to better conceptualize the way we design.
I mean, there's this example of the collaboration of Benjamin with an architect,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Benjamin is an author in the book, Andrew Benjamin, and he's a philosopher, and he collaborated with in the studio, and there a lot of it is about about also the way we interpret what we can find and what we can define, but also how we call it. And I think this is a very helpful way to also question ourselves. And that's because, and that is something you have to practice. Because it's hard.
Yeah, and it's easier to do it in the school than in the real professional practice. But also in the professional practice, it would help a lot. But then there's lots of fronts to fight.
Yeah, but it will be one way to tackle these crises, and we have like climate crisis and social inequalities, and to somehow deal with it the way if one profession for its own doesn't know how to do it. So I also guess it's like probably the only way we can do it. I'm nearly convinced of it. Are there
Questions, yeah.
Yeah. Are there any questions in the audience, or you want to
Comments.
ask, or some comments, some feedback, some ideas? I don't know, anything. Is anything on your minds?
Well, I would like to add something which we were talking about before. Sorry for that. Perhaps you can think of questions in the meanwhile. Because there's a danger if you talk about gardens that you idealize it very, very much. That you also, no matter how you design your garden, if it's wild or not, I think there's always something which makes you uncritical because it's so beautiful or it's so wonderful, it's so relaxing, and that's where this movie comes in, which we were watching yesterday. It's the zone of interest, and there the garden, which is about the director of Auschwitz, of the concentration camp, and his family, Höss, and they have a garden adjacent to the wall of the concentration camp, and the garden is wonderful. It's beautiful. It's quiet. It's well designed. It has many nice flowers. It's nice smells and things. If there wasn't that noise from the camp, it would be a paradise. And that's what it shows very well. How in this little world of a garden, you can sort of retreat into something which is completely surreal. And I think that's what we were addressing now in these different questions, and also what is addressed in the book, shows that this is something which we have to avoid.
Yeah.
Thanks for this.
Yeah, that's a strong idea, and there would be one more time the chance to ask some questions.
I have a remark.
Yes, good. Go for it.
So, there is something I have been missing all the time in this presentation of gardens and your vocation, occupation. You were talking about who is using, who is making, who is designing. The curricula of the landscape design around the world is missing philosophy, sociology, and so on. And where is the aspect of relationship with the plants? Plants are living creatures. They are the hugest mass of living species in the world, like by far. And they are the oldest form of, not the oldest, but almost the oldest form of living form on the earth. And they are actually the most successful. Everything else dies out, but the plants live on. So they must be pretty much clever, more clever than dinosaurs, or probably as well as more clever than the surrogate,
Mammals?
mammals.
Well, I think
there must be something, and we know. I understand the importance of what the human does in the environment, but we influence each other. It's not that we influence the nature, and that nature doesn't influence us. This is a mutual relationship. But where do you stand with it? Because we didn't hear anything about it.
well, perhaps it's, I don't know. I completely agree with you. I think this is something we don't talk about because it's obvious.
For us, it's obvious.
We always deal with plants. I mean, we have, that's in the core of our occupation. So that's not what we're missing.
Yeah, but at this point, it becomes my first question becomes provocative. You don't know what wilderness is. You take it for granted. What it is. What is the relationship? What is culture? What is nature? What is wilderness? Where are these three categories meet? Where do you put the gray zone? Where do you?
But do you have a definition for wilderness?
Well, one thing is what Anna at the beginning said: the freedom.
Yeah, I think freedom is a good starting point. And I also think you're right that sometimes we, landscape architects, we objectify the plants because we use them, we plant them, but we learn a lot about them, and also we learn about the so-called societies, phytocenology, the society of plants, how they grow together, but then we create artificial societies of plants from elsewhere but we do use them according to their growing condition and so. But and I think that in this respect, of course, you're right. I also would, I don't know. I would be careful with applying human relationships to the relationships of plants. I mean, it's like, looking at plants as they have the same abilities. You used one good word before. You said that they're clever. I wouldn't say they're clever. They are much more adaptable than we are. I wouldn't say clever. I'm not keen to use these terms that apply to humans, to plants, but definitely it's. I think that in wilderness, in the true wilderness, of course, the wilderness without the impact of human, there's more freedom, and that's why this for us is so attractive. That's why we get so attractive by, I don't know, the forest animals when we encounter them on our walks through the urban forests, because they're so rare and so magical, because they're already we're alienated to them. And I believe it's also time that we get less alienated from the world of other species than humans. So that's as far as I can answer.
I think it's better to speak about vegetation than plants. We should really be involved in designing vegetation. It's not a lot of individual species. What we're trying to, there's natural vegetation, there's succession which creates vegetation, and then there's design that creates vegetation. So this is interaction between species creating things that are more structured and complex. It's not just about plants. I think that's a narrow way to look at it. I don't know whether you agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think there was one more question.
Yeah, there was one more question. Okay.
In the back also.
Okay.
I don't know if it still is.
Okay. Is there one more question, maybe?
This French guy was, but maybe not. Yeah.
There was a very important exhibition at AZW a year or more ago that toured through the whole Austria. It was this crisis of the land and excessive sealing of the ground, no? As Austria is statistically the leader of the amount of ground that it seals per day within Europe. So I think it's important to speak about the depth of the gardens and the vegetation. But I think that's also relating to your comment of the blue and green infrastructure, which is annoying even to hear. But what do you see the potential of addressing, like, since this sealing of the ground is taking away the ground from whatever wilderness or pre-farmland or whatever, what could be the extremely large-scale role of the garden to address this issue in Austria? Where do you see potential for a territorial aspect, like thousands and thousands of kilometers, or a very different understanding of how can you tackle, similar is happening in Slovenia, of this kind of extortion of the ground, unnecessary extortion of the ground with buildings, but also with just kind of sealed spaces of concrete and asphalt. So where is the role of garden in this crisis, from your opinion?
That's a really huge question. I don't know if you...
Well, the garden can solve everything.
Yes. No, I think it's this is really something. It's a process of negotiation. I think in the planning process, but it also requires, I believe, a switch in the way we think of what needs to be done and how needs to be done. So the question asked is whether we need this, and it's a switch in operational thinking of how we address the problems without causing the multitude of other problems through it. And I think that, landscape architects could have a say in this turnover, should have a say in this turnover. Also, readdressing their own role in the participation of the sealing of the ground. Yeah, but not only by the technical knowledge they possess, or even some knowledge about natural processes they acquire.
Well, I think one way of supporting at least the reduction of that ceiling could be to revalue landscapes. I think that's something which has been talked about, I don't know, I'm sure for decades in our field. But the question is, how do you tell people who are decision makers or somebody else that this is a valuable landscape? That's something where the design comes in as well, and that could be also a design for, let's call it wilderness, but it could be something which makes it visible and it makes it and possible to experience something which is stronger than just a field of corn.
And also not do something, to decide not to design. It's also a way to go sometimes.
Just thought it may be good to mention the European Landscape Convention, which does value landscape, and Austria happens to be one of the, I think, 6 countries out of the 46 members of the Council of Europe that haven't signed it. So I think that says that haven't signed it, yeah. And I think other ones are things like Albania and San Marino. It's really rather shaming for Austria, and it does actually say something about how landscape is valued in a country that really depends on landscape, because tourism is a massive economic factor, as we all know. So maybe we ought to be pushing a bit more again to bring the European Landscape Convention into the public consciousness and political consciousness.
Great, that's the policies. Yes, in Slovenia is the same. We ratified it but never signed it, and that's right. And this would ratified, yeah, but not officially signed it, and it's quite a problem. But I mean, not only this. It's just the way the things go. They go opposite to what we talk here about.
Yeah, now we ended up in the really hard questions of politics, landscape, and society. I think that just shows that we have still a lot to talk about and like to realize and redefine, to reflect, and to find some solutions, as you mentioned before, according to the objectives and tasks we figure out right now. I don't know if you want to add something more which you really want the audience to hear. Otherwise, I would say that we can talk in the more informal atmosphere for some more time, I guess. I would like to thank you for all these insights to your book and to the discussions. I would also like to thank the audience for this active participation and the depot team for these organizational things. As mentioned before, you have some books with you. Yes. It's possible to buy these books if you want to read it, or if you need, I don't know, a present for some dears of you. And also Lilli had some announcement that there are the L&X lectures, if I'm informed right, and the International Landscape Lectures, they are taking place, and there are some more dates coming up.
Yeah, they're not fixed yet, but they will.
They will. So, and if anyone is interested in that, just feel free to talk to Lilli.
Well, there's one lecture which is coming up, which is by the visiting professor and artist of the Dutch collective Observatorium. It's André Decker, and that's on the 29th of April.
The 29th of April.
Yes.
Yeah, so just remember this date. And yes, thanks a lot and enjoy the evening.
Thank you all. I also thank you for moderating us, and especially to the audience for these provocative questions. Thank you very much.